Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, and I am joined by the always wonderful Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill. How are you doing today?
Hello, Ryan. I'm doing well. Yourself?
Oh, we can't complain, because today we are going to be talking about dix, or as it is written, X, parentheses, dix, the French word for the number 10, which the Roman numeral X also signifies. This is presented by Crow's Theatre, presenting Côté Danse. It's created and choreographed by Guillaume Côté, and it's playing at the Streetcar Crow's Nest Theatre until June 18th, which is a very short run. We are filming this right as we came back from opening night, and we are very, very much hoping that we can get this out before the run is completed, but given the brevity of the run, we cannot make any promises, but we hope you are watching this in time to still get out and see the show.
Indeed.
I'm going to ask you, Jill, all your thoughts about the show, of course, in a moment, but before we do, we have to ask our favorite icebreaker question. What is in your cup today?
What is in my cup? Yes, I am drinking my favorite tea, Earl Grey. Just Earl Grey black tea in the cup mug. And of course, it's very important to stay hydrated, so I have some water to get me going as well. How about you, Ryan?
Well, pretty much exactly the same, minus the Earl Grey, but I also have my Cup of Hemlock cup here, and I have water in it because it's late at night and I don't want anything caffeinated, and it's important to stay hydrated, as you just said, as I'm sure the dancers in the show can relate to after what they've just been through.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we will put up a spoiler shield in a little bit because there's a lot of things about the content of the show itself that people might want to go in not knowing anything about. But before we do, Jill, how would you describe this show for somebody who might be interested but doesn't really know a lot about it?
Yeah, well, I think right off the bat, the program note that they provided, there's a digital extensive program that you can have access to when you go to see the show. They also have a little leaflet that's sort of like a culled down version of the performer that you can look into as well. But there's actually a piece of text that was in the digital portion that was sent to us prior to that I'm probably going to be referring to a lot in the conversation. And I think I want to turn to that right now just to kind of get the text off of my screen and into this podcast. So basically, the note tells us that dix connects to the myth of Odysseus about journeying far, but always desiring to return home. The piece explores the notion of the inner compass and the idea that home may be a state of mind. And further along in another paragraph, it mentions how this piece was created during COVID, so a very transformative space for humans. And as we know in conversations in the cup, it's come up a lot for artists especially. What does it mean when kind of our craft was taken from us, and how do we return back to it, and what are the stories saying now? So I feel like that's there's a lot of different stories or pieces of text at play in what I just read, in the mere sentences I just read. But then the whole piece is a dance piece. It's physicalized, basically what I read. But of course, I think I mentioned this in my review of Transcendence's Grim Night with Mac about a year or so ago, how dance is so subjective. Like I honestly, I'm not a dancer myself, but I've said this before. I've actually said this in my interview with Brie Clark too. I'm very drawn to experiencing dance pieces. I really do find that dance is a form of art because there is no text like through the mouth that it's extremely subjective. So everybody's perspective and takeaway from a dance piece is going to vary depending on where you're coming from or what you're experiencing. To me, when I watch dance or see dance, I find more than any other art form, I'm I'm asked to kind of question, why am I viewing the piece the way that I'm viewing the piece? So I just kind of wanted to share that before I kind of explain. So what this piece does is it encapsulates kind of what I just read in how my brain wants to sort of tie or try to tether to what I just read. But I guarantee you every other person in the packed house tonight had a different experience, and different moments were more poignant for them or settled for them a certain way, different relationships. So basically there's a handful of dancers, 5 of them in total, and you're kind of weaved through storytelling through dance and having these sort of sentences in the back of your mind while watching the different sort of relationships in solo pieces that make the piece what it is. Yeah, you can sit back, relax, and allow the pieces to just wash over you or hit you or penetrate you however you see fit. Or you can do, like I said, what my brain was kind of doing is building stories or making sense out of what maybe someone beside me would think is not necessarily senseless, but doesn't have meaning. I think that's the beauty of dance. So I don't really want, again, I know we're going to pop up a spoiler, so I want if to get into, I kind of gave us the structure and gave us the narrative bed, I guess, of where the piece kind of launched from. But I think that's kind of where I'll leave. Ryan, do you want to add if there are any textual support or anything else?
I don't know any textual support to add per se. I do like what you said about dance being very subjective, and a lot of people will have different takes on it. Just to position my own relationship to this, I personally, I do not have a lot of experience with dance, certainly not as a performer, and it's a little more, but not much more as a spectator. I've seen a handful of dance shows in my day, but it's not something that I would ever claim expertise on. And this is why part of what I love about the format of reviews that we do, where we're in dialogue. So neither one of us is positioning ourselves as the expert critic who, has the last word on whether or not this performance is a perfect example of what it is trying to do. But also that we approach this, engaging with that subjectivity in this dialogue that, you have different perspectives, I have different perspectives. I feel, a little bit on my back heel trying to articulate what I saw and find the language for doing it justice in any kind of, artistic appraisal. And we are approaching this not as critics, but as enthusiasts of the performing arts. And hopefully, regardless of what conclusions we come to, more so I'm speaking for myself because I do feel ill at ease claiming any authority over even my own experience of what I saw. I think it was, overall, I will say this is a very remarkable dance piece.
Masterpiece.
Based, even with my limited experience of this genre, I recognize that this is very fantastic, technically flawless performances from the performers. Lots of very interesting things being done with sound and light that we'll get into more post spoiler shield.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a fan of modern dance, this is, I think, a show that you've been waiting to see for a while, I imagine. And I do hope that people do get out and see this while it's still running, especially enthusiasts of the genre. I don't know if there's anything more general appraisal wise you want to add before we throw up that spoiler shield.
Yeah, just to snowball a little bit off of that. And I guess this is kind of like a resonant thing. Again, listeners, viewers, you're going to get a snapshot of my brain throughout this whole conversation. I will be vulnerable and share my experience with you all because one of the statements I just read was this piece was created during COVID and deals with the themes of, what does it mean to return home? What does it mean? And again, as artists and especially dancers, where arguably, over the pandemic, their entire medium was halted. Dance is a physical way of expression, right? And right now, where we're recording this on a Zoom and it will be put into a podcast and put on a YouTube channel, other artists were kind of able to pivot like this, go digitized. And dancers didn't have that same explorative sort of launch pad. And so I kept saying to myself while watching this piece is, look at their bodies. My body is finally in a space with other bodies that are doing unworldly motions. These 5 dancers are absolutely astonishing. Some of the best athletes, I think, in our city right now is what we witnessed tonight. And just again, we'll get into specifics of technicalities, but just, I think I'll just end it there of just being in this space with these bodies doing the hard, rigorous storytelling and work there was multiple times throughout the night I was like, I feel so honored to be sharing this bare space with these semi-bare bodies bearing themselves to us in real time again, with a packed theater house. It was and I know like theaters have opened, back up. We're kind of back to the norm, but it was a reminder that we didn't have that privilege a couple years ago. We were, trapped in our own houses and left to our own devices. And some of us didn't have devices to go to. And so I just kudos to the 5 artists who, offered their bodies through storytelling tonight and just, reminded, I was reminded several times of like, yep, this finally you're back to doing what you do best and we're able to experience community. Yeah. Anyways, I could go on and on about that. We'll get into more and more, but should we pop up the spoiler?
Yeah, so we often do, for those watching this on YouTube, fun visuals to indicate the spoiler zone that we are entering. I think we agree this would be perhaps a footlight or a floodlight of spoilers. So, those listening to this in audio only format, hop on over to YouTube if you want to know what that looks like. But we are now entering the floodlight or footlight of spoilers. So
right.
Everything beyond this point, if you really don't want to know a lot about the show going in, I'll just remind you that this is Dix, Crow's Theatre presents Côté Danse, choreographed by Guillaume Côté. And it is playing at the Streetcar Crow's Nest until June 18th, which is very soon. So check it out while you still can.
Definitely.
Spoiler zone. Okay.
We're lit up. The spotlight is on us.
All right. I guess there's a lot of different angles we could take to get into this. I don't know if you want to get into the storytelling specifics yet, or if you want to more kind of shout out the performers and the technical elements a little more before we get into the meaning of it all, perhaps.
I think just because, again, this is like a thread to carry over, maybe we can talk a little bit about the performers in general,
Sure.
Just because like what I mentioned earlier, Mac and I did Transcendence's A Grim Night, not their most recent production, but several, I honestly think now it's about 1.5 years or even more so ago, and where we got to see Kelly Shaw and Martha Hart in Transcendence's Grim Night. Kelly was Cinderella and Martha was one of the stepsisters, and they were 2 of the dancers in tonight's performance. So I just really quickly want to share how awesome it was to see them in this performance and then also in Grim Night. So Grim Night, them having kind of character specific intentions to fuel their choreography. And there really is like a hard knit story weaved, albeit with Grim Night, but with this one, it being a little bit more up to interpretation and ethereal, just to have the privilege of seeing both of those dancers dance like raw, contemporary, more personal bits was super neat, especially someone I don't frequent dance productions as much as I would love to. So it was really cool to be like, oh, cool. I saw Martha and Kelly in something else. And just to get a scope into their artistry again was really neat. I guess while we're on that note too, I can chat a little bit about all the other performers. Natasha Poon-Woo was, again, we'll get into this when we get into the storyline of things, but she had very protagonist energy for me. I kept coming, and I think that most of the piece was tailored to this too, but I kept going back to her kind of being our like pebble thrown into the lake ripple kind of thing. Sorry, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just I agree that there's a bit of a protagonist energy, I guess, putting it in dramatic terms, as we as theater frequenters probably are inclined to do. But yeah, she was very often positioned on outside of the group, that the 4 of them were all doing something very in sync with each other and choreographed, and she was either just off to the side watching or doing her own thing. And then there was a lot of very interesting moments when she then got integrated for a short time and then back out. So I think very astute of you to lock in on that as
absolutely
something that was going on here.
Yeah, and she had like very special connections with all the other dancers too. Like there were moments, again, where there was duets happening or solo dances that kind of flowed from one dancer to the other. But anytime she interacted with someone else, there was like a specific spark, almost like a discovery that she was finding through them or with them or of herself, and they were influencing her. So I want to shout out like Natasha's character work in stringing that along was astonishing. Like if any of the characters on stage were like like to hold the audience hand and welcome them into this piece, I think it would be through Natasha. And I think she did that brilliantly. And just like pure athleticism, like everything that any of these dancers do. I'm going to say this multiple times. I'm like, oh my goodness, you are superhumans. Yeah. And then we had Willem Sadler was one of the other dancers. Again, astonishing. I found like his movements were very like actor infused. I mean, all of them were doing that, but there were like specific characters and personas that in my experience, I was seeing him either be in conflict with or flowing like in between and having that kind of fuel his movements. And I think a lot of what I'm saying for me, at least reified in his solo bit, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like the little tiny blips, conflicts, which we can get into when we get into the actual choreography at whole. But so again, just shout out. I'm going to shout out everyone because I think
there's only 5 of them and they all deserve a shout out.
Yeah. And then Evan Webb, they again, astonishing. Their solo piece, I think, will be with me for a while. I think every performer did this throughout the piece for me, where they kind of allowed themselves to step outside of the piece and kind of just show themselves in a raw state. And I would wonder if that, again, I don't know, is there table work involved in something like this? Like, I don't really know, again, is there more of like a playground bit at the start of the process where each performer kind of gets to share their opinion, similar to table work? I guess Bree Clark, if you're listening, or I'll get you back on and we'll discuss what is table work for dancers. Maybe it is exactly like the usual theater way of going about things. But I just wonder if our director, Guillaume Côté, choreographer rather, sort of allowed that, like had them and them like collectively, each individual dancer, like have a moment of stepping into themselves. Also, it might just be a byproduct of putting themselves in the piece, right? So I really found through Evan's solo piece that there was, almost like a cheeky addition.
It was all in the wink when they winked at us.
Of course. But it was interesting. But before they even winked with us, they were giving wink energy. So when they winked, I was like, okay, I'm picking up on your energy. They also accomplished so many fantastic lifts in the piece. Again, everyone had contact, improv, like interaction and contact with each other. But there were just some really like contorted lifts that I think Evan was sort of the baseline for, and they were an awesome foundation. Yeah. And then Martha and Kelly, I've already shouted them both out. Astonishing. Kelly, this happened when I watched her in Cinderella as well. I just get so captivated by her eyes. There's such like an intensity and fluidity in like what her body is doing is just as interesting as what mentally is happening behind her eyes. And that was something that I was drawn to again in this piece that I remembered I was drawn to in Cinderella. So it just seems like it is a very Kelly stylistic thing to do. And it really adds so much to an already quite layered piece. And Martha's brilliant. Like, wow. Just again, like there was the moment where she comes and crouches over top of Natasha and does like finger hand choreography that's so specific. And like, I literally saw a setting, I saw images. And again, talking back to Grim Night, she's someone that like I see or feel an environment or colors when she dances. So again, that's adding, I feel like every performer added a technical element to the already like technical elements that were on stage, which is miraculous because it's like, how do you do that and also move your body the way you move your body and be in full conversation with other bodies without saying a word? It's blows my mind. Ryan, would you like to say anything?
No, you're saying it all so well and better than I feel like I could, so please feel free to continue.
But I guess that's a really good pivot. I did mention how like technical elements sort of reside in each performer. But of course, in the beautiful space at Crows, basically, I guess we can map out the space was set up proscenium style in their main space. And it was just a blank, bare, black box looking stage. But yeah, like black dance floor and just some light fixtures on the side. And then throughout the piece, there were either like spotlights, sometimes like gobos that look like leaves lighting on the ground. A spotlight would be circular, or sometimes it would like segue to Venn diagram, or it would be square, which we can get into unpacking what those shapes do. And then as the piece kind of went on, there was some color piped in by some LEDs at the back of the space. And then the soundscape. So that covers sort of what the lighting was, and again, we can unpack lighting in a second.
I'll just say let's just give a shout out to Simon Rossiter is the name of the lighting designer. It's very stunning, and just the sharpness of the shapes and the way that have flowed from one to the other and synced up with the music, especially with those footlights that are on the upstage.
Astonishing.
Space. Yeah, it was very, very well done. And, I really loved a lot of the, we have these like floodlight circles that are on stage, and the way that they kind of encroached in, and it created these claustrophobic feels, like, force fields almost that the actors were trapped within. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that's what you were going to get into, but
I was going to pivot us to sound and then go back, but let's unpack like some of the using some of the moments with the light. So I guess like the piece starts with Natasha and Willem doing like a bit of a duet vibe. And anytime two dancers are together doing a duet, regardless of who they are or where they're coming from, I always think relationship, like not necessarily intimate or romantic, just like these two humans are intertwined in some shape or form. And we're going to go on a journey with them. And so I thought that first piece was sort of like a wonderful synopsis of the whole piece that we were about to see, because for me, like it was a contemporary dance. They're in conversation, their bodies are in conversation with each other. But then anytime they would be separated, or an individual there'd be something that would spark within them, the lights would either like expand, or like Ryan was saying, or they would close in, encroach. And to kind of go back to the theme of the show, what the show is playing around with, this inner compass, and what does it mean to return home or to leave home? The lighting for me throughout this whole piece was doing that. It was either forcing them to be in an encroached spotlight, or what does it mean when you allow yourself to go back out into the world, or to go back to what you're doing, or you're forced to go back to what you're doing, and the lighting would then shift to expand. What does it mean when you have multiple circles that are large and overlapping, as opposed to just the one that you're meant to stand in or lie in? So that is where kind of like we get a taste of what the lighting is kind of doing. And then that end of that piece, there was a lot of like gesture to not being able to breathe, or like quivering or shaking. And again, I think that's the humdrum of this beast called COVID that we didn't know how to deal with, that was changing our lives, that were changing the way we interact with others, changing our physique. What does it mean when COVID engulfs your artistic body? Coming from experience, it's not fun. Being a singer, being a dancer, being an athlete, it's not fun. Anyway, so that's kind of like, I kept my eye out for like, okay, the lighting is telling a story alongside what our bodies are doing. And then getting into the squared lighting was lovely. I think it was Evan and Kelly did a duet. And to me, and again, it was the tone of the music, which we'll get to in a second, that would sort of in my brain tell me what relationships were happening, or what the music was saying was kind of like painting a story in my mind of like, or placing characters or relationships on the stage. And what was neat with the duet that was happening with Evan and Kelly, because the lights were square, it really, really reminded me of like, these are two people that are trapped in the same four walls, and they are helping each other through trying to navigate these same four walls, but they're going through mentally or physically things that neither one of them will be able to understand, and no one can understand. And how are we supposed to understand when we only have the same four walls? And I was like, wow, this is when we were all locked down in the same four walls. And, you know, yeah, what does it mean? Like how being trapped in a box and with another being, like, gosh, your journey is not just your journey anymore. And you're literally living on top of someone else, and they're crumbling and you're crumbling, and you're trying to keep each other up, but like you're going to just fall down. Like it just, all of this stuff was kind of cooking in my brain, encased in this square lighting choice. And like, I wonder if I would have that sort of like boxed in, I'm looking at the same four walls, I'm lockdown COVID thing, if it wasn't a square. Like if they were doing that whole thing in a circle or in a heart, which is kind of obvious, but like, or in like a triangle, right? It's like, it was interesting. I was like, oh my gosh, what does it mean when we have shaped lighting? Which you don't have often in like everyday theater shows, unless it's specific to the piece that's going on, right? Yeah. And then I just think to add to that, sorry, I'm literally rambling, but the colors, like when there would be pops of colors that would happen throughout the piece as well. And again, a lot of the color I'm remembering, or when it really sat with me, is when Natasha's character would come on. And again, we can get into like what we think was happening with that character, but there was like she was definitely discovering and like exploding and allowing herself to explode or discover. And I just like, I love the pops of color that kind of would show up when she would spark that for herself and then for the group too. Yeah. Lighting. Wow. The power of lighting. Sorry. You talk.
Okay, well, I feel like that's more than enough about lighting. You said you wanted to talk about the sound too, so that's a good pivot into that, I think, because they were very copacetic with each other. So what did you think about the sound, which was done by a band called Sun Lux?
Yes.
And yeah, you have to say about this element.
I will be downloading all of their music because it is right up my alley, as Ryan can attest. Anything that's like contemporary meets EDM meets like ethereal vibes, sign me up. I think, and again, I can lob this to you in a moment as well, Ryan, but to me, it married the piece just like the lighting did. Like as we pivoted from dance to dance and experience to experience, the soundscape and obviously the text, like the singers occasionally popping up in the songs, wasn't necessarily consistent voice, but that would help sort of create a story or be backbones to the story that may be already going on in your head from what you're seeing. So I just thought it was pretty much for me the same kind of world of sound, but the tones, emotional tones shifted depending on what sort of energy the piece was needing, or the piece was responding to the different energy that the songs were giving, which allowed for, I think, the human experience as we go in ups and downs and ebbs and flows. And that was sort of magnified when we all had to pivot our lives to living in the same four walls. Like there's a vicious cycle going on here that I think the piece spoke to very well in sound alone. What were your thoughts with the sound, Brian?
Yeah, kind of similar to what you're saying. I felt like there was a very interesting metallic quality to the sound during so much of it, not entirely through and through, but certainly during key moments of just instrumental music. It very much had this echoey kind of distortion element to it that I thought very much suited the emotional atmosphere of the piece. And then when there were more lyrical components, it very much feeling like pop music is probably the wrong way of putting it, but that's where my mind sort of went. But yeah, it had this, more something you might expect to hear on the radio as compared to the more ethereal moments. And I thought the juxtaposition between those two made a very interesting roller coaster for this piece, similar to what you were just addressing.
Totally. And the sort of metallic tinniness that you're kind of mentioning reminds me of the Bon Iver soundtrack or album. Do you know its name
One
offhand?
in a Million, the third one. It's honestly the one that I listened to the least of all of his albums.
See, it's the one that I listen to the most. And when I listen to that and when listening to the piece tonight, I also get like post-apocalyptic kind of futuristic vibes. And I think that's a very interesting thing to percolate with as well. And I think the costumes kind of married the music really well too. Like every performer had sort of like ripped either like gray or black, sort of like futuristic, tattery looking, very minimalist. But yeah, it kind of sparked this like dissonance, the sound of the music was resonant in their costumes, if that makes any sense to anyone else's brain, but that's what my brain was doing.
It's a total work of art, I think, is the best way of drawing all these threads and different elements together. Everything felt like it belonged with the other elements, and no piece of the puzzle was out of place.
Absolutely. I know we are looking at getting this review out during the run. So, Ryan, I know I have said a lot.
Yes, if we keep talking, the run will be over.
I wonder if we should just allow our viewers, listeners to experience it themselves. And again, I said this at the beginning of the piece, like what my brain experienced, it will be very different from what your brain experiences. All we know is that this is a masterpiece. It is human bodies doing what these particular bodies do best. These are absolute athletes, astonishing performers. And you would be absolutely honored to be in their presence and them sharing their bodies and their breath with you. So get on out. Ryan, take us home.
Is that, so is this concluding thoughts, or what are we?
Well, I guess, what's your...
Yeah, there's so much more. We've alluded to the storytelling so many times. I don't know, do you want to slip in any last thing about the story, or you'd rather just leave it for people to...
I think just know, what my brain did, and what we kind of talked about with Natasha, is it's a person going through a journey, kind of coming upon a group, and what does it mean when they influence the group, or when the group is influencing them, and the sort of conflict you're put in between, and kind of this knowing that you have to be a part of this group, or you should be in this community, but when each person in that community is their own individual sense. So to me, it's every performer, you see the human as the individual, and then through the tight-knit choreography and congruous group numbers, you see the human as the group. And that's how we operate as communicable beings. We are our own individual selves living in community with others. And what does it mean when that's kind of upset or disrupted, or not the way that you want it, or not the way that it should be for you? Yeah, that's kind of what I got from it.
Yeah.
Do you have any other story things?
I just, the one thing I kind of, I don't know if harped on it is the right word, but the one thing that I'm a little fixated on is the description that you read earlier, mentioned that it's inspired by the Odyssey, which I might not know a lot about dance, but that's at least a text that I'm quite familiar with. And part of me watching this was trying, exerting a lot of mental energy to try to understand the Homeric influence on this piece, and try to see, okay, when we have this group of 4 of them dancing and one of them's off to the side, is this the Lotus Eaters, or is it the Sirens, or is it the Cyclops maybe? And I think I enjoyed it a lot more when I unplugged my brain from trying to figure that out, because I think, trying to take, not just a master text of the canonical literature, but almost the master text of canonical literature, and say that this is an adaptation of that, forces this sort of palimpsestuous reception that I don't think I would have even thought to make that comparison if I hadn't read that description prior. If it's not like there was things that I was able to read as particularly Odyssean imagery, and I think if we just think of this framework as something about a collective signifier of longing and homesickness and a desire to return, I think it feels like it fits nicely with the pandemic themes that you're talking about a lot. Even if I'd be lying if I said I could specifically see explicit connections. And this isn't, I was quite struck by the amount of times in your opening description that you use the word storytelling, because I'd be lying if I said I understood what the story is, or if I didn't have these descriptions to base it on, that I completely understood what the story they're telling is. I think it's a very impressive piece that does a lot and kind of can evoke a lot of emotions and feelings and thoughts a lot of way. But I think I do want to say, for people who are going in thinking like, oh yeah, I love the Odyssey, this is like a dance version of that, I think you like curb that expectation a little bit, because it will evoke a lot of feelings and things, but don't expect it to be this beat by beat story. And and I guess just one last thought that I want to throw in here, but then we might wrap up because we do want to make sure we can get this out on time. I'm struck by the title, which we had some conversations early on, like about what do we call this play? Is it X-Dix, or is it even French? Is it Dix? And yeah, we did determine that it's just the X signifies the 10. It's Dix is all we call it. But there's 5 performers. You expect if there's like a number in the title, maybe it's referring to like 10 performers on stage. And, you know, you read something in the description about symbolic meanings around the significance of the number 10, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about what you think we're having our attention drawn to this magic number. What do you think it meant for this piece?
Yeah, again, referring to the piece that's in the digital program, it's saying the number 10 is associated with the beginning of the cycle of life and the inevitable transformations that entails, a symbol of completeness, finality, and perfection. I think, that encapsulates exactly what this piece is doing, because even like completeness, finality, and perfection, the piece is actually kind of opposite to that. You're kind of watching imperfect perfection, and that is human. That those are humans. Like, that's how we operate. Like, it's impossible for us to be perfect, no matter how you write it. You could write it as a Roman numeral 10. You could write it as in brackets Dix. You could write it as 10 in any other language. We're not going to be perfect. We can strive to be, whether through ourselves or in community, but it's never going to happen. And, you know, what does it mean too when an external force shakes that up for you, such as pandemic, right? And the whole, like the beginning of the cycle of life and the inevitable transformations that this entails. Well, now you literally have, you know, something that, what I just said, like what you have in your mind of a perceived thing of this is the cycle of life and I will change and I will do all this. Well, what happens when that pathway is disrupted, or what happens when you have another human add to what you think your life is or what you think your perfect path is? What is it going to do? And to me, like, each dance that is in this piece is a response to that, or a byproduct of that thought or of that relationship of like, well, I guess we're going to be crumbling on top of each other now, or I guess I'm going to need to explore other circles and contort my body this way or move this way or explode this way, or I guess I'm going to have to lay down on and curl up as a ball on the floor. Like, it's these things of, we will never know how life will unfold and transform. And I think, again, I keep bringing back the pandemic, but like, when we were placed under such a microscope and being like, oh my goodness, life is literally short. I know someone who has perished from this thing, or I myself have dealt with, like, I think we were, as humanity, we were smacked in the face of like, what happens when your path is disrupted? And that is humanity, but it's like, we were faced with it, everyone kind of thing. And I just think this dance, again, how my brain went on the journey with the dancers and the piece, kind of, like, shows that, explains that, displays that through dance.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for those who stuck around with us this long and ignored the spoiler, despite having not seen it, this show is Dix, Crow's Theatre presents Côté Danse, created and choreographed by Guillaume Côté, and is playing at the Streetcar Crow's Nest until June 18th. Go see it if you have not done so already. I'm sure you will have all kinds of interesting, stringy, imperfectly perfect thoughts of your own that you can then apply and get in the comment section if you want to share what you thought. And we'd love to hear everybody's subjective interpretations of this very interesting piece.
Amazing.
Well, I think that's it for us. Jill, do you want to sign off, share your social handles and plugs, whatever you'd like to discuss?
Sure. Yes. My artist Instagram account is jillian.robinson96. You will see some covers of fun songs on there and some advertisements for upcoming projects. Super quickly, I will be playing Citronella in a new panto musical, Citronella the Musical, happening at Gravenhurst Opera House, directed by the phenomenal Autumn Smith and written by Autumn Smith as well. So I'm excited to jump into that piece coming up in the summer. We'll also be doing several concert series up in Gravenhurst as well. So if you find yourself in Muskoka doing some cottage country vibes this summer, come and check it out. I'm also doing a puppet show for babies and toddlers, but anyone is welcome as well, called Pin Pin the Explorer. We've done a handful of shows at Red Sandcastle Theatre. That'll be coming back in August. And this weekend, or when this episode comes out, either pre or post this episode, I will have done a stint of those shows at Witchwood Theatre. So doing a lot of TYA and musical loveliness on my end. Yeah, Ryan, you want to take us home with the Cup plugs?
Yeah, no point following me personally on social media, but if you like what we do here at Cup of Hemlock, we are at COH Theater on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you might be watching this, or we're the Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast on all the podcast places where you might be listening to this. And if you like hearing Jill and I talk about dance, we have another one of these coming up pretty soon, also on a dance show, which, you know, we're really immersing ourselves in this genre, and we'll have more to say about it in the coming weeks. But yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, everyone, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in the next episode. Cheers.
Cheers, friends.